Welcome to the Simply Equipped podcast. This is Gregg and Leilani Sizemore. We're the pastors at Creekside.Church.
Our hope here on this podcast is that you are inspired and equipped to radically love and live on mission. Welcome to episode 53. This is the second part of our B.L.E.S.S series. So last episode, if you missed it, it's probably important that you pause here and go back and listen to it because we're definitely kind of picking up in the middle of a
acronym.
Yes. Yeah. So we did the first part on the last episode, kind of gave an overview as to why we really feel like this is hugely important. And it's just a super helpful tool to be able to share the gospel with the world around us.
And the tool is called B.L.E.S.S, which is a series that we're teaching through at Creekside. And so kind of changing the format up a little bit, just wanting to go deeper, have conversations around topics that we're preaching through, and then just kind of talk it out of like, what are those practical ways? And so Dave Ferguson wrote a book called B.L.E.S.S. That's the driver to all of that. Highly recommend that read. It's really challenging, really simple.
That book, like honestly, if you haven't read the book, highly recommend it.
Yeah.
It's an easy read in the sense that it's not difficult to grasp the concept. It is not an easy read if you read it from the perspective of allowing it to convict you.
Absolutely.
And so I would say our entire team has been, in the words of Katie Tyndall, our connections pastor, wrecked by the book. Because it really does challenge, we do a lot of things that would be considered ministry. Yeah. Are we personally
loving our neighbors? Loving our neighbors is the heart of it.
And neighbors can be the people literally that live right around you. Yeah. Or it can be your circles of influence. You know, your sports teams, your the place you work out, your gym, your workplace, like any of those arenas we would consider, you know, spheres of influence and places that we can be a blessing. So the
whole concept is we're blessed to be a blessing, and really the call to use the churchy word evangelism, to leave the 99, go after the one, share the gospel. You know, we drove this whole series out of Romans 10 that is the, you know, how are they to know unless we are sent and preach the gospel, you know, and then it closes in that section with just how beautiful are the feet of those who carry the good news. And so the whole concept is just want to be really practical. How do we live this out in a way that we're blessing people, but also blessing people with intentionality, you know, being good neighbors, being good friends. You know, we kind of talked last episode about just how we've lost the art of friendship. We've lost the art of neighboring, the art of actually interacting with the world around us in a way that not only shows the love of Jesus, but also gets, you know, earns the right to have gospel conversations, talking about faith. But in the acronym, what I love about it, you know, and I'll kind of recap it and then we'll jump into the rest, because we covered the B in B.L.E.S.S, which was begin with prayer. Then you have L, which is listen, you know, begin to engage, which we'll talk about active listening a lot. Then E is eating. S is serving, and then the second S is sharing, kind of sharing your gospel story, your testimony, and then the story of God, and inviting people into a personal relationship with Him. But that process is important. You know, the beginning with prayer that we covered last week, that's inviting the Spirit, preparing our hearts, preparing their hearts, wisdom, discernment, direction. Today we were going to talk about the L, which is listening, and then we'll get into the E.S.S, because these are kind of just the active, practical ways. So we can kind of land the plane today on the further. But let's jump into the listening. I would say, just for me, and I'll let you do some talking here, because even, you know, as we joked about preaching through this series, you had made a comment of like, yeah, you should have let me preach that one, because you're not an amazing listener. And I'm like, I get it. The Spirit's convicting me. So, but no, just you're a beautiful listener. You know, that is just a huge quality that you bring to relationships. You are a safe place for people to share and all of those things. I'm praying that I'm growing in that.
You are.
You have said that.
You are.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I kind of teed you up to compliment me there, but truly, like, it's been a conviction of mine of like, man, be a better listener, you know, because if you're like me and you love to talk, it's so easy, you know, especially if you're passionate about the gospel and the word, and, you know, you have the answers of the gospel, and you just want to, like, man, let's cut through all this listening stuff and let me just give you what you need. And his name is Jesus, and it's this. And, but man, just hearing people's stories and perspectives, and it's just really, really good. So talk about just active listening for a minute. Then we'll jump to the E, eating. I'll kind of share there. That's my forte. And then, so you're a good listener. I'm a good eater. So let's do that.
I'll let you do that one, because I'm good at eating. It's just not my, like,
spend a couple minutes. Active listening.
I don't think about it too much.
Why is it so important when it comes to our approach of building relationships, being good neighbors, and sharing the gospel?
So, what comes to mind when I think about active listening, so I am naturally more wired to listen than to speak, or to listen first. So I know how to speak. It's part of, you know, my personality first. So it comes fairly naturally to me, right out the gate.
Yeah.
But I would say that I have done my best to hone that skill, especially in becoming a leader, because I'm not sure that I could lead well if I didn't first listen well, to absorb everything before making, you know, talking or making a decision. Or so I went to a leadership conference one time, and this is the thing that sticks out in my mind all the time when I think about active listening. I think a lot of people are wired similarly to you. And I know a lot of things. And I think I know right out the gate how to help you without first listening to you.
Yeah.
So I'm listening in a way that I am engaging with you, but I'm actually just waiting for you to finish your sentence so that I can insert what I think you need.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I mean, people do that all the time. I mean, if you're honest and you evaluate, there's a lot of times you're not talking, but your dialogue in your head is already, you're just waiting for them to pause so that you can say what you want to say next.
Sometimes we don't even wait for people to pause.
Yeah, talking over people. I'd never do that.
So in this training, we went through this exercise where we had a partner, and we had to listen to a word that our partner was saying, and we couldn't pre-think how we wanted to respond. We had to say another word that began with the last letter in the word that our partner just said. Meaning you had to really be leaning in and listening.
Yeah.
And the whole point of the exercise was, don't pre-think what you think that person is going to say or what that person needs.
Yeah.
You have to actually listen, meditate on it, and then respond.
Yeah, that's good.
And I think when we approach listening from that angle of, I'm not going to assume I know what you need. At the core, we know everyone needs Jesus. But Jesus interacted with people in stories, in walking and talking, and met them where they were, which means he got into their lives in a certain way. And he met them with the gospel in a way that they could actually internalize it and hear it, meaning he was listening.
Yeah.
And so I think when we approach it from that angle, people feel seen and heard. They feel loved by you. You actually were Jesus.
Yeah. No, I mean, I literally preach that, like that. And it's cool when you look at like the stats too. If you do any kind of like social research around what people's perception of being loved is, listening, being heard literally equals feeling loved. Like it's crazy how there's this hunger, especially like in the next generation, younger kids, teenagers, and it's adults too. But like when you listen and hear me and lean in and like care and all that stuff, it's like that equals love.
It does.
Like there's something wired in our humanity of like just to be known and like, man, you actually care, and it comes through and manifests, I think, most strongly in the listening piece. It's so good.
I think it's so important because people actually are not waiting for you to fix their problem.
Right.
In a lot of ways, you can say something that's really good, but unless they're ready to hear it and also make a change for themselves, like meaning they're sort of internalizing what they need to do, like they're coming to that conclusion, their lives are not going to be changed.
Yep.
So what we have to learn to do is listen and ask them a good question that helps them self-actualize.
For sure.
And say out loud
that's good.
the thing that they need to fix in their own lives.
Yeah.
So they're the ones coming to that conclusion, not you projecting anything onto them.
That's good.
So being an active listener is huge.
Yeah, I want to drive a point you just made just to make sure everybody just heard what you said, because it's so good. This is such a good like coaching tip. Is when you're actively listening, really leaning in, and then even when you're speaking, you're asking good questions, which, we've heard people say you're kind of digging for gold right there. But in the questions that you're asking, you're also, what you just said was you're helping people externally process while you're listening to where they then come to their own conclusions.
Yep.
And there is something psychologically powerful about when your next step, because we just naturally, I think, are just rebellious people, but when your next step was your idea and not somebody telling you what to do,
1000%.
it's huge. And so just asking good questions, and a lot of times just listening to people, they come to their own conclusions, just hearing themselves even say it or talk, or questions of like, hey, if you were me, what would you tell you to do in that scenario?
Yes.
So I don't have to say it. You say it out loud, like put yourself in my, or whatever. And it's super powerful. So it's really, really good. So so kind of like where we like went in the preaching too was, and I love that it segues out of that begin with prayer. The B before listening is, did you pray for that person?
Yeah.
Did you pray for your heart to be prepared? Did you pray for their heart to be prepared? So anytime you're wanting to engage in a conversation with a friend, coffee, lunch, whatever, man, pray for them.
Yeah.
God, give me opportunities. Help me to listen really well. Like show me, Holy Spirit, those promptings as to when you want me to speak and when you want me to listen and what I'm supposed to say and what questions I'm supposed to ask. Like bathe that conversation with prayer before you ever get there. And then when you get there, begin to just listen in the Spirit. And then, and I love that too, listening is happening at that point, because you also got to listen to God first.
Oh, yeah.
So we talked about just the power of like God speaks. Are you listening? And then are you listening to the people? So there's like this listen to God piece. Then you have the listen to people piece. And then when you get into kind of like corporate church and mission and all that, it's like, do you listen to your community? Yeah. We talk a lot about the one, and these are those one-on-one like conversations of people that you're trying to reach. So that act of listening to them, but you're listening to felt needs. You're listening for, hey, what excites you? What pains you? What fears do you have? Like that's how you get to know somebody, is by listening and asking those good questions. I loved a story that Dave shared in his book, B.L.E.S.S. He had talked about a missionary group that had gone out, and I had talked about this in the sermon that I shared. I shared the story where they were saying, man, we'll build hospitals, schools, food banks, whatever it was. There was a lot of these just big projects. Hey, we've got resources. We want to build these. And they were saying all the things that they could do to bless this community. And then finally got to the question of like, what do you need? And what they said was, we need a mailbox.
I loved that story.
No, literally, we need a mailbox. And they're like, what do you mean? We can build schools and hospitals. And like, no, we just need a mailbox. And here's why. If we don't have a mailbox, then we don't have a zip code. And if we don't have a zip code, we're not on the map. And if we're not on the map, we get no recognition that we even exist from our government. Yeah. So when it comes to any kind of connections of like what we really need, bro, can you get us a mailbox? And it was a 2-year process to get them a mailbox, but you got to listen for that.
Yep.
So they came in with all the answers. Here's what we can do. Here's all what you need. All the assumptions of here's what you need. You actually find out what people need when you listen. Yes. And so super important, it's man. Powerful. I love that. That's so challenging and convicting to me, to just really be a good listener. So we'll pray for that at the end. Can I throw
something out here too?
Yeah.
Because I know you'd like, I'll have a vulnerable moment here.
Yeah.
You teed me up as being a good listener.
Yeah.
I feel like I do that really well with strangers. The best practice to see if you are like, and it's convicting. Your spouse, if you have a spouse in your family, I can be a really good listener to everyone else, but that's the hardest space for me to listen. So it's the best training ground for me.
It's good.
And so if we're doing this with our spouse, with our children, with people that you inevitably don't give your best to.
Yep.
We're probably not listening super well.
Good.
And so for me, it's always convicting. Start there as practicing. Am I a really good listener?
Yeah.
And then it naturally
It's actually a good
out.
question to ask your spouse. Hey, am I a good listener? And they'll typically be pretty honest.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I've asked you that question and didn't like the answer that I received.
Well, and I'm not a great listener to you sometimes too.
Sure.
And so that is like,
what I love about what you're saying is it's not, this isn't just evangelism.
No.
This is how you relate to humans.
Yeah.
So being
correct.
a good friend, being a good spouse, being a good neighbor.
When we set this up we've lost the art of how to do this well. And I think it is because we have a lot of knowledge.
Yeah.
We have a lot of, I would call faux relationships, false relationships. We're, sort of connected to people through tech and, social media and all those things. But it's not true connection.
Yeah.
It's not true listening. It's not truly being with people in community. And so because of that, I'm not saying it's anyone's fault. I think it's the world we live in. And so in order to push back against that and reclaim what God is asking us to do, we have to figure that out in this time and space that we live in.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, so B, begin with prayer. L, listen. Listen to God, listen to people, listen to your community. Don't assume what people need. Be a good listener, ask good questions, and so on.
And then your favorite.
Let's go to the E. Eat. I love this. It's like, Dave, thank you for this, bro. But no, so you begin praying for your neighbor, that friend or whoever. You become a good listener, as you're hanging out. Let's just talk about the power of having a meal. It's so good. When you see Jesus, it's so interesting. You look at the story of Zacchaeus, or you look at the story on and on. I mean, he was called friends of sinners, and all of those scenes, it was around a table.
Yeah, because you go eat with them.
Having a meal. I love the story of Zacchaeus specifically because that was the first thing. Jesus just invited himself over for a meal, which is pretty cool.
You do that all the time.
I'm all about it. Hey, I mean, I said it from stage. It's like, hey, I don't do this enough. If y'all got something good for dinner, call me up, bro. Let's do this. Let's practice, on one another, and then before we get missional. But no, there's just something powerful about breaking bread.
Yeah. I think it's because you're just you're in a little bit more of a relaxed setting.
Yeah.
You're just kind of. You see people at the Realist, you might have wing sauce on your face.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
You're just.
You learn a lot about somebody. I was thinking about our first date.
Oh man!
I saw you throw down on a huge burger from TGI Fridays or wherever it was when we were kids.
You're like, dang girl, you can eat.
No, I was like, dang girl, you can eat. This is amazing. Come on, bro. You ain't playing around.
I do not mess around with
a little
food.
Bacon juice and barbecue sauce on your face. Let's go. So, but it's real.
You had
it's
to marry
good.
me.
100%. 100%. 25 years in, we made it work.
That's
Let's
right.
go.
That's right.
But yeah, so just thinking through just the art of eating. And here's I think the challenge of this too. And I feel convicted about this all the time. We talk about this because we're entering in a different stage of life where historically with our kids, our circle of influence and our ones, the people that we wanted to connect with was our kids, friends, parents, and we were active coaches with our kids with lacrosse and basketball. And that's how we, served our community. But they're not doing that anymore. Caden just graduated. He's off in college. Brielle's a upperclassman. She drives. She's not in sports anymore. And we're kind of in that, who's coming to our table?
Who's our circle?
Who's our circle of influence? And so we're in a season of life right now where we're not preaching at you. We're joining a conversation with you of man, who are you having at your table? Who is it that you've identified as your one that you begin to pray with? Who are you engaging with conversations and being a good listener? But then who are you inviting over, for a meal or going out to dinner or whatever? And just beginning to build relationships through that. I think Jesus modeled that, and it was just super powerful, but there's so many distractions to that too. We're too busy, or we've got too much on our calendar. We've even been in a pretty cool conversation behind the scenes of being careful even as a church and an organization to not being so busy with like church things that we save space and room for people to actually have friends, you know, because if you're always at church and always at a Bible study and always at a training and always at a conference and always at this, it's like, when do I have time to be friends with people and actually build relationships in an organic way? So anyways, it's just good. So yeah, breaking bread. Anything else on that?
No, I think it's kind of self-explanatory, but I think it's important. And the heart behind this too is hospitality.
Yeah.
When you're eating with someone, when you're either having them over to your house or even going to a restaurant together or going to their house, and you're bringing something with you, it's just the art of being hospitable to someone. And I think that is just part of this loving people well. So even if it's, not in the traditional way, I'm having people over, think about just the heart of hospitality. Absolutely. I would just challenge people that. So it's not necessarily like I need to have people over at my house all the time, eating a meal together. Sure. Think about the heart of hospitality and how can you extend that to someone else? Yeah. So
100%.
Yeah. How can you make space to be hospitable?
Yeah, it's good. Yeah. Cool. And I think even in that context, again, connecting all these dots, because some people are really good at hospitable and some people love the backyard barbecues and like are actually in it. Maybe you're listening to this like, dude, I break bread with people all the time. Like this is how we roll. But there is some intentionality to it because it's not eat to just eat. It's, did you begin with prayer? Are you praying for those people that are sitting around the table? Are you a good active listener when you're sitting around the table? And then are you leveraging, this meal for hospitality? And like, and that kind of segues into also how do you serve people, which is the next one. So begin with prayer, listen, eat. First S is serve, beginning to serve people. And I think there's a context here of like, one-on-one serving, acts of kindness, generosity, serving people, whether that's church, serving one another in holding babies on Sunday mornings to holding doors or making coffee or, there's all types of service. And then it even grows into how are you serving your community? How are you serving the world? But I think on a one-on-one basis, let's just talk through a couple of just practical ways of how do we serve our friends? How do we serve our kids? And how do we serve their, just your circle of influence? Would love to hear just a little bit there. And then we'll go on to the last one just to kind of close it up with, how do you then earn the right to share the gospel message? Because that's a process. Now you've done the work. You prayed, you listened, you broke bread, you've served them. All of that is leading up to now you've earned the right relationally to have a gospel conversation. And most likely, like you said, it was either this episode or last, that eventually people just begin to ask questions and stuff. But let's talk about serving for a minute. How can we serve one another?
I think it's first important to talk about what's the heart behind serving. Christ serves us. He gave his life for us.
Didn't come to be served, but to serve, right?
So it's the heart of Christ.
Yeah.
And it does something to us when we have to sacrifice our comfort.
Love that.
For someone else. I think when we serve and not get recognized for it is super important. So serving without the expectation of receiving something in return.
Kind of the not letting the left hand know what the right hand's doing kind of thing.
Is that like, I'm going to do this and I'm not expecting anything in return. So the heart behind why we would serve is super important.
Yeah.
If we're expecting anything from the other person when we do it, you potentially need to pray for God, because the heart of blessing someone is giving without it being reciprocated.
I love that. And I want to reiterate something Dave even said in his book. He talks about this because some of us might be listening to this and we're all guilty of this at times. Yeah. These practices are not checklist things.
They're not.
Okay, I prayed. Okay, I listened. Okay, I broke bread. Okay, I served them. We almost see it as like a means to an end. And the reality is in all of these, you keep coming back to the heart of Jesus. Yep. This is just how he loved people. This is how he was a blessing to people. This is how he related with people, because we're relational human beings. And through the way that we relate and love one another is how a lot of this fruit is actually going to come. So don't view these practices as like a have-to checklist thing.
They happen organically in the way of life.
The way of life. And unfortunately, we've lost the art of this way of life. And that's our hope, is to drip this back into the culture of our church, into the culture of anyone listening, is just to be mindful of how we, relate to people.
So I think if you begin with prayer, you're actively listening to the people that are in your life that you're trying to bless.
Which you heard their needs at that point. So now you know how to bless them.
You're eating with them. You're showing hospitality. So the heart of serving is Christ came to stand in the gap for us. What's the gap in their life?
That's right.
And how can you
felt
help?
Need?
How can you help fill that?
Yep.
What is in your power to do?
Yep.
It may not be all that they need.
Yep.
But it's a tiny way of saying, Christ saw me, I see you.
That's good.
And so that's what the heart of service is all about, is finding the gaps in people's lives and inserting the love of Jesus into that gap.
I love that you mentioned kind of the generosity piece of that too, that like you're sacrificing something, because to serve people, it takes time. It takes treasure. It takes talent. It's giving of yourself.
What
living
do I have
as a living sacrifice that
I can give?
I can fill that gap for you. So, and it's a beautiful, again, reflection of Jesus giving himself for us to bridge the gap.
Absolutely. That's how we are Imago Dei.
Amen.
We're the reflection.
It's good.
Yeah.
It's good. All right, so last S is sharing, sharing our story, sharing the gospel story of God. This is one of my favorite things, for me, again. And this is such a hard tension for me, too, because, as Christians, people don't want to, they should never be projects. And we use the word, don't have an agenda kind of thing. But I always talk about this, too, of but I do have an agenda. But it's a godly, beautiful agenda of I want you to know God, and I want you to be known by God, and I want you to be free from sin and death and your flesh, and I want you to know the truth and be, all those things. And so I balance that out with hey, be careful that they're actually not an agenda in the context of how people would say that in a negative sense. But then ultimately not falling into that place where, I'll live my life as the gospel and then only use words when necessary, when the reality is it is necessary. Yeah. People, again.
I actually love your heart on this. And I love that I think you can be manipulative with it, but I think how you avoid that piece in it and not viewing people as projects is you let them and the Spirit set the pace.
Yeah.
If you're listening, you know when it's the right time to ask a good question that would lead to that conversation where you get to drip a part of your story. Maybe it's not the full story. Yeah. In our bike class, we teach you how to perfectly share your story from beginning to end.
Sure.
And well, not perfectly, but
be able to a framework.
Yes, a framework
Creation,
of how
fall, redemption, restoration.
Yes, and your story falls in line with that framework. God's story falls in line with that framework and how we intersected with God in that framework.
Yeah.
And so that's the outline. But if your heart is, I want you to have what I have, and that is a good thing, you're not going to manipulate the timing of it because you've done all of the other relational work that needs to be done.
Yeah, and I think that the power of this practice of sharing is really talking about, I think it starts with sharing your story, actually
1,000%.
being honest, being vulnerable, talking about your faults. Man, as Christians, so often we always love to share the best side of us or the best version of us or all the blessings or all the goodness. And in reality, man, it's so powerful when you just get vulnerable with people, when you're honest with people, when you talk about your struggles and your sin and your confessions and the things that you've done. I mean, just that is amazing, But it's also powerful because people lean in and then they're going to be more honest to obviously share, be a good listener and hear their story and their pain. And man, when you listen to people's stories too, you begin to have so much more compassion for why they do the things they do.
1,000%.
Man, as Christians, sometimes we are so quick to judge people for all of their dysfunction when in reality it's man, but when you listen to their story, you see okay, that makes a lot more sense. And I'm sorry that I went to such a conclusion as to why you're so dysfunctional in that. And so it just gives you a compassion for the other person. They begin to have compassion for you when you're sharing your dysfunction and your sin and all those things. And then obviously use wisdom. We always say use wisdom with what you share and how and when, and listen to the Lord and like what's right and good timings and all that. But then eventually getting to the place where you are also sharing the story of God, you know, that God created everything and that the fall did happen and eternal separation from God. Penalty for sin is death, but God in his love sent Jesus to redeem us and buy us back, and resurrection to new life, and he's returning and restoring all things together. You know, it's like thinking through that, you know, simple ways of how do I share the story of God. And the more you do it, the more comfortable and competent you are to actually do it, you know? And so I think I love what you said earlier too, like practicing with your spouse, practicing with your kids, like begin to just practice sharing your story. What is your testimony? What has God done in your life? What is compelling about how your life changed? How did Jesus change your life? Because that's going to be the things that people lean in and say, I want that. I struggle with the same thing you struggle. Jesus has healed you there. Man, I need that. I need that freedom. I need that confidence. I need that passion and vision that you have or whatever. And again, it's just so beautiful. But you earn the right to get there. And it begins with prayer, active listening, breaking bread, serving one another, and then just sharing the story.
What God's done for you.
Yeah.
There is nothing more impactful than us sharing, because, you know, people can have all types of arguments against the Bible and God and their perception of all those things. It's a lot harder for them, this person who has loved them well, who has listened to them, who has served them well, who has eaten meals with them, to deny what God has done in their life.
That's good.
You know?
Yep.
So it's powerful when we live in this way.
It's good. Yeah. Well, cool. Well, we're out of time. So, Dave Ferguson wrote a book called B.L.E.S.S. Man, get it, read it. We also just preached a 5-week series on it. Go back on our YouTube, listen if you want to, you know, see our messages on that too. Thanks for listening. You want to pray for us?
Absolutely.
Sweet.
Father, I love you. Thank you so much for, first, your son, Jesus. Thank you for giving. Thank you for blessing us so that we can then in turn be a blessing to the world around us. Thank you for the invitation. You did not have to invite us into this great story, but you chose to do so. And so, Father, help us to just feel excitement about that invitation, and then to live lives out of that excitement, to want to partner with you in the mission of sharing the hope and love of Jesus with the world around us. Our world can feel crazy, but you are our stability. You are our reason for living. You're our hope. You're our salvation. So thank you for that. Thank you for all of it. We love you. It's in your precious name we pray. Amen.
Amen.